the heavyweight championship of the world, the most coveted prize in boxing, and some might argue the most coveted prize in all of sport. Since the inaugural heavyweight champion of the world, John L. Sullivan, back in the 1880s, the title has been held by some of the greatest who have ever donned the squared circle. People like Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Larry Holmes, and Mike Tyson are just some of the names who've reigned as heavyweight champion, who've also been undisputed in their time. Today, in 2023, there are two men who stake a claim to be on the throne of boxing. The heavyweight champion of the world, the emperor of masculinity, Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury, both stake their claim to boxing's most coveted crown. But there can only be one. And in 2023, it is likely that we'll have the question answered. Who will be the king of the heavyweights? But in 2023, it's been over 20 years since we've had one man reign supreme as heavyweight champion. And whilst it looks likely that it will end this year and we will only have one at the end, how did we get here? And where has the long road to undisputed taken us? Boxing has changed a lot through the years. Since the early 1800s, when it was the London Prize rules, to the Marquess of Queensberry rules we have now, which have been largely unchanged in the last 100 years. Since then, we've seen various different sanctioning bodies come into the sport. We've seen weight classes change. The original 8 weight classes have now been replaced with many weight classes. Whilst they're still there, there's a lot more to fill in the gaps. But the heavyweight division has remained unchanged. And the heavyweight division is the division which is at the top of the boxing Everest. It's the division that most people would say is their favourite. And it's the division that many people dream of being champion of. In the early 90s, Mike Tyson went in to the year 1990 as undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. He had, at the time, the 3 main sanctioning bodies, the WBC, the WBA, and the IBF. He held all 3 of their titles and looked in no danger of losing any of them. But 6 weeks into the year 1990, February, he went over to Tokyo, Japan to meet the 40-1 underdog, James Buster Douglas, a fight that many people said was a complete mismatch. The US seemed disinterested in it, so it went to Tokyo. And in Tokyo, we seen the greatest upset in boxing history as James Buster Douglas thoroughly dominated and beat up Mike Tyson, surviving and scaring the 8th round when he was dropped, to knock Mike Tyson out in round 10 and thus becoming the new, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. There was much made about what would happen with Buster Douglas next. Would he rematch Tyson? Who would he fight? Well, 8 months later, he stepped in the ring at the Mirage in Las Vegas against former cruiserweight champion Evander, the real deal Holyfield. This was not the Buster Douglas who fought Mike Tyson, and Evander Holyfield had an easy time knocking out the former champion in 3 rounds.
What a shot by Evander Holyfield!
Evander Holyfield, now the 3rd man in the year 1990 to say he's undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And he held that title for 2 years, finally losing to Riddick Bowe, the first fight of their trilogy, in a trilogy that would be one of the greatest in boxing history. Riddick Bowe, now the 4th man in the 90s decade to be undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, a title that he would not hold for very long, because Riddick Bowe, rather than facing his WBC mandatory challenger, the great Lennox Lewis, decided to throw that WBC belt in the trash. Lennox Lewis then became WBC heavyweight champion, and for the first time since the 80s, we had multiple champions in the division. That meant that road would lead to undisputed eventually, but when would that road end? Lennox Lewis would fight and defend his WBC title before losing it in a massive upset to Oliver McCall, whereas Riddick Bowe would go on to rematch Evander Holyfield and suffer a loss. Evander Holyfield went on to take what he would have thought would be a routine defence against former light heavyweight champion Michael Moore. In that fight, Evander Holyfield suffered a shock loss, and Michael Moore, now the heavyweight champion of the world, he held the WBA and the IBF, and he decided, why not have an easy touch for my first defence? Why not fight someone who's known but is no risk? Why not fight big George Foreman, almost 20 years removed from his loss in Kinshasa, Zaire to Muhammad Ali in the legendary Rumble in the Jungle? George Foreman went in and tried to become the oldest heavyweight champion in history. Foreman, despite losing every round, a man known for his power. In the 10th round, he landed a right hand, to quote the great Jim Lampley, anaesthetised Michael Moore. Now, we had a heavyweight champion of the world, a unified heavyweight champion at that, who was now 45 years old, going on 46. He didn't hold on to the IBF title for long, as he refused to defend it against mandatory challenger Tony Tucker. But he did, in fact, defend his WBA title against Axel Schultz, an unknown German heavyweight. Foreman, fortunate to get the decision, refused to give Schultz a rematch. Therefore, it meant that that belt became vacant. It fragmented the division even further. Axel Schultz would fight Michael Moore for the vacant IBF title, Michael Moore coming out on top. Tony Tucker would fight Bruce Sheldon for the vacant WBA heavyweight title. And out of prison and looking to cause damage was Mike Tyson. Since Oliver McCall beat Lennox Lewis, he went on to fight Frank Bruno at Wembley Stadium. Bruno finally coming good and winning a title. He then had to face Mike Tyson, who beat Frank Bruno viciously in 3 rounds to become WBC heavyweight champion. Tyson gave up that title and instead would go on to face Bruce Seldon for his WBA heavyweight title. Mike Tyson, in normal Mike Tyson fashion, got rid of Bruce Seldon in a round. This was to set up a super fight, a fight that had been 6 years in the making against Evander the real deal Holyfield. But this was not the Holyfield of 1990 who Mike Tyson was purported to be fighting. This was a Holyfield who'd had very tough fights. 2 losses to Bowe, a loss to Michael Moore, heart trouble, and was getting up there in age. Bit like Buster Douglas, no one gave Evander Holyfield a prayer against Mike Tyson. But in November 1996, he went in there against Mike Tyson. Some bookies had him as a 25-1 underdog, and he went and he did this.
Holyfield continues to dig in. A left hook to the head. He's got Tyson in trouble. Tyson's ready. A straight right hand. The Talbot stops the fight.
Holyfield knocked out Tyson in the 11th round. A massive upset at the time. The rematch was set, but Tyson, knowing it was going to happen again, he got himself disqualified in the 3rd round against Evander Holyfield by biting Holyfield's ear. Holyfield, that didn't deter him. He kept on going. He rematched Michael Moore and he picked up Michael Moore's IBF title, which meant that Holyfield was now unified heavyweight champion, and Lennox Lewis, who in the immediate time had regained the WBC heavyweight title, the two of them were on a collision course. For the first time since 1992, we were going to get Undisputed again. And it was going to happen in 1999. Lennox Lewis versus Evander Holyfield in what we thought would be the only fight. Well, the fight happened and Lennox Lewis beat Evander Holyfield up. However, in one of the most controversial decisions in boxing history, the fight was given to neither man. In fact, it was scored a draw. It left a bitter taste in people's mouths who'd planned on seeing an undisputed champion being crowned. Either Holyfield as a 2-time undisputed champion or Lennox Lewis as his first time undisputed champion. The rematch had to happen. It was set for November 1999, and this time Lennox Lewis left no doubt in anyone's mind. He beat Evander Holyfield in a competitive fight, but he got the decision. Lennox Lewis, now undisputed champion of the world. If you had said to all the people in the arena that in 2023 Lennox Lewis would still be the last undisputed champion, I'm sure many of them would have laughed at you. But here we are now, because at the time many didn't realise it, but boxing had new fighters coming, but it was about to go into a bit of a dark age. After becoming undisputed champion, Lennox Lewis didn't stay undisputed for long. He vacated his WBA heavyweight title, choosing not to face mandatory John Ruiz, but to face the undefeated American Michael Grant instead. At this time, there were two new contenders coming out of East Europe who were starting to make a name for themselves. Both of them were from Ukraine, and they both shared the same last name, Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko. The Klitschkos would pick up various titles along the way, but at the top, it was still Lennox Lewis. Mike Tyson still lingered, as did Evander Holyfield, who actually picked up a version of the heavyweight title by beating John Ruiz. But Lewis was still the man. And in 2003, he would face Vitaly Klitschko with his WBC heavyweight title on the line, and a very, very tough fight for Lennox Lewis. He came out with the win, cutting Klitschko's eye horrifically. Lewis retired after that fight, which meant that we had a division without a recognised heavyweight champion, and it was fragmented. At this time, the WBO, the World Boxing Organization, was officially recognised as a legitimate sanctioning body, which meant that before there were 3, now you want to be undisputed champion, you've got to get a 4-piece. So we had 4 belts, potentially between 4 fighters. It seemed a big task that we would get undisputed. Vitaly Klitschko, after Lennox Lewis retired, would pick up the WBC Heavyweight Championship of the World. He would pick that up by beating Kirk Johnson, and in 2004 made 2 defences of that title, one against Corey Sanders and the other against British contender Danny Williams, before having to walk away from the sport stemming from a knee injury. However, he walked away but returned in 2008, where he faced then WBC Heavyweight Champion Sam Peters. He defeated Peters, and Klitschko was back where he belonged, WBC Heavyweight Champion of the World. As for brother Vladimir had to wait a little bit longer, but in 2006 he was named mandatory challenger for the IBF Heavyweight Championship, and he went and he beat Chris Bird inside 6 rounds. Klitschko finally had a piece of the heavyweight puzzle, and in 2008 would unify in New York City with Sultan Ibragimov. This meant that both Klitschkos had a piece of the heavyweight crown, and brothers were not going to fight. So it meant that for the time being, as long as there were 2 Klitschkos on top, we were never going to get undisputed. Vladimir would come the closest, defeating David Haye in 2011 to pick up the WBA title. So in a way, Klitschkos were undisputed, but they shared it between the 2. But in 2013, Vitaly Klitschko finally announced that he was walking away from boxing, that he would be retiring and therefore vacating his WBC Heavyweight Championship of the World. It fell to Chris Arreola and Bermane Stiverne to determine who would be the next heavyweight champion of the world. They would meet in 2014, with the stipulation being the winner would have to face up-and-coming 32-0 with 32 KOs Deontay Wilder as their first defence. Bermane Stiverne knocked Chris Arreola out in the 6th round, and in January of 2015 he would go on to face Deontay, the Bronze Bomber Wilder. Many people questioned, could Deontay Wilder hang with Bermane Stiverne? In fact, many people asked the question, could he even go 6 rounds? And he'd only ever been 4 rounds, the longest in his career. Well, he answered all those questions and more. January 2015. Deontay Wilder beat up Bermane Stiverne over 12 rounds to become WBC heavyweight champion. Vladimir was still making successful defences of his titles. So it looked like we could get Wilder versus Klitschko for undisputed. However, Team Wilder said that they weren't ready to go into an undisputed clash with Vladimir Klitschko just yet, which meant Klitschko would have to go and face his mandatory with the WBO, a man from Manchester in England, the Gypsy King, Tyson Fury. Vladimir know what he was getting himself into? He certainly did not. Tyson Fury put on the performance of his life, not just in the ring, but at the press conference as well. Tyson Fury, unified heavyweight champion of the world. Deontay Wilder, WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Two colourful characters, they seem destined to meet in the squared circle. However, Tyson Fury signed a rematch clause for this Vladimir Klitschko fight, which meant that he had to face his mandatory challenger for the IBF. He chose not to. He chose to honour the rematch. Therefore, it meant the IBF title, for the first time since 2006, 9 years earlier, became vacant. Charles Martin picked up that title, which meant again, we had three champions, all staking a claim to the heavyweight championship. Charles Martin would go on to lose that title to Anthony Joshua. Deontay Wilder would defend his title throughout 2016. But Tyson Fury, he went downhill in 2016. Early signs in January was showing that all was not right with Tyson Fury, and by the end of the year he was overweight, dealing with depression, alcohol and drug abuse. No fit state to box, which meant his titles became vacant, which meant for the first time in boxing history, in December 2016 we would have 4 people who staked their claim for the heavyweight championship. New Zealand's Joseph Parker fought Andy Ruiz December 10, 2016 for the WBO heavyweight championship of the world. Joseph Parker came out on top. Anthony Joshua and Vladimir Klitschko would lock horns April 2017 for Joshua's IBF heavyweight title with the vacant WBA heavyweight title on the line. Joshua would be successful. It would then be a year before we get a consolidation. Anthony Joshua and Joseph Parker in March 2018 met in a unification. Parker's WBO, Joshua's IBF and WBA. Joshua came out on top. At this point, there was only one man left who could stop Anthony Joshua becoming undisputed, and that was Deontay, the Bronze Bomber Wilder. But unfortunately, the fight never materialized. Contracts were sent, offers were made, but for whatever reason, boxing politics got in the way, and Deontay Wilder saw an easier path. He saw an easier path to glory and to money by facing the newly returned and looking a shell of himself, Tyson Fury. They met in December 2018, and Tyson Fury put on the performance of his life, outboxing Deontay Wilder throughout, but only coming away with a draw, surviving 2 knockdowns as well. The WBC ordered an immediate rematch, but both guys decided to have interim fights and wait until 2020 to have that fight. In the meantime, Joshua decided to go ahead and make a couple of defenses of his unified heavyweight title. He faced Andy Ruiz in June 2019 in Madison Square Garden, a place that in the 1930s was known where champions go to lose their title, and that's exactly what Anthony Joshua did.
And Ruiz counters! Ruiz counters and Joshua's down!
Andy Ruiz Jr., now unified heavyweight champion of the world, signed with PBC. It seemed logical that him and Deontay Wilder could now meet for Undisputed. However, Joshua invoked his rematch clause and they would meet in December of 2019 in Saudi Arabia. Anthony Joshua coming out on top. And February of 2020, Tyson Fury dethroned Deontay Wilder to become WBC heavyweight champion of the world. Could we potentially have an all-British clash for Undisputed? Eddie Hearn seemed to indicate it, so did Joshua. But Tyson Fury still had to rematch Deontay Wilder. He tried his best to not go through with that fight. It seemed likely in 2021 that we would yet see Joshua versus Fury for Undisputed, a fight that we all wanted to see. However, an arbitration hearing ruled that Deontay Wilder has a right to face Tyson Fury. Therefore, they would meet again. Joshua decided, I have to fight my mandatory now. His mandatory was none other than former Undisputed Cruiserweight champion Alexander Usyk. Alexander Usyk and Anthony Joshua would meet September of 2021, at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, Alexander Usyk put on a boxing masterclass. He schooled, he hurt, and he outboxed Anthony Joshua over 12 rounds. Tyson Fury, in a couple of weeks' time, was able to beat Deontay Wilder in their trilogy fight. Going into 2022, it seemed likely that we would have Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk for Undisputed. However, Tyson Fury had a mandatory with WBC in the form of Dillian White, and AJ, he invoked his rematch clause, which meant again Undisputed will be put on the back foot. And if neither guy could win, what might happen there? Well, Tyson Fury fought Dillian White in April 2022 at a sold out Wembley Stadium, and he knocked Dillian White out cold in the 6th round. Whereas Alexander Usyk, he went to Saudi Arabia to fight Anthony Joshua again and again. He went over there and he schooled Anthony Joshua. The heavyweight division is finally in a place where there's no ifs or buts. Both guys have no further obligations. Both guys have met in the center of the ring. They have looked into each other's eyes, and both guys know that the other guy is next. But who will emerge victorious, and who will walk away the loser? In 2023, Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk at some point will do battle. When and where remains to be seen. But one thing we know for sure is the best will most certainly be fighting the best. And when all's said and done, the man reigning on top of the heavyweight division will have earned his place, and will have earned his place amongst the greats who have been and the greats who are no longer with us. 2023 is the year of Undisputed. Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk. Two men will enter the ring, but only one will leave as king.